Will there be a nuclear World War III in the end times? Well, it doesn't really matter what we think. What does the Bible say about it? But before we answer that, we need to answer if it's even possible for humans to do that to each other. There isn't a day now that goes by where the media and the social media don't speak of the threat of nuclear weapons. To Western minds, it's just unthinkable. And most of our viewers are Westerners, USA, Britain, South Africa, etc. However, to those in the East, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, the use of nuclear weapons isn't unthinkable. In the right situation, they may choose to use nuclear weapons if they think they can win a war. Win a war that damages their opponent but doesn't really damage their homeland, at least too much. The USA has always maintained that nuclear weapons are strictly for deterrence. That if we have an arsenal that's capable of completely destroying Russia and China, neither would dare use their nuclear weapons because they would be destroyed themselves. This is called the theory of mutual annihilation. The USA, Israel, most European powers hold nuclear weapons to deter other nations from invading them or using those weapons. And over the past 70 years, that very shaky deterrence has prevented the use of nukes. When the U.S. presidents meet with their dictatorial adversaries, they always remind them of this fact, that nuclear war is unthinkable and unwinnable. Just this month, a White House official said, quote, "A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought," end of quote. The White House also pointed out Russia has signed on to joint statements affirming a nuclear war can't be won and should never be fought. If it is never going to be fought, then why are we looking in the Bible to see what it might say about nuclear war? Kind of pointless, isn't it? Well, not really. The first reason is that the Bible is the authority. If it says something's going to happen, it's going to happen, regardless of what a White House official says. Second, Russia and China might not think that nuclear war is unwinnable. And if so, they might be willing to chance the use of weapons in the right circumstance. Let's talk about what those circumstances are first, then we'll examine the Bible prophecies on this issue when something might happen, and also how nuclear weapons might be used. Yeah, the Bible actually says something about that. But before we do that, let me give a big shout out to Tim Martin, who helped us research this topic. Tim has been a member of this community for quite some time. Now, in terms of Russia or China's strategic use of nuclear weapons, they might consider it if they believed the USA or Western powers wouldn't or couldn't shoot back. In those cases, nuclear weapons might not be as unthinkable to a dictator like Putin or Xi Jinping, and certainly not to somebody like the Ayatollah of Iran. Let's examine situations when the USA wouldn't likely use nuclear weapons. When my advisory board and I created this landmark video on Daniel's 4 beasts arising, talk ensued that Russia would never invade a NATO country like Latvia or Estonia because World War III would break out. But would it? Would it be much different than what we're seeing right now in Ukraine? I would argue that the USA would never use nuclear weapons to help Latvia or Estonia. Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, former CIA Executive Director of the Task Force on National Homeland Security and also former Chief of Staff of the Congressional EMP Commission, says you never use nuclear weapons to defend a country you can't find on a map. That may sound humorous at first, but it's very truthful. The USA won't risk the lives of everyone on the planet to honor their promise to defend Latvia or Estonia. It's that simple. They're not strategically important enough for the USA. The simple answer is the USA wouldn't defend them, and neither would Europe defend those countries more than they are doing right now to defend Ukraine. So the bottom line of my advisory board discussion is that the invasion of Latvia and Estonia would not bring about World War III, and Putin probably knows that. Oh, there'd be a lot of screaming and yelling, but it wouldn't be World War III. Later in this video, we will discuss why an invasion of those two countries, Latvia and Estonia, may be part of what the Bible prophesies for the end times. But first, let's continue with this suppositional analysis and see other situations where the USA might not use nuclear weapons. So we already know defending NATO countries is probably not an area where nukes would be used. Now, for instance, what if tactical weapons were used on the battlefield? A tactical nuclear weapon is a much smaller nuclear weapon that only affects a limited area. Let's say Russia uses limited tactical nuclear weapons in its invasion of Estonia. Let's say a Russian tank fires a tactical shell at 10 NATO tanks and destroys them all with a single shot. Or what if a Russian nuclear cruise missile takes out an aircraft carrier? In these two situations, would the USA fire its deterrence-based missiles, which are designed to blow up vast areas, like take out a city and take out Moscow? No. The usage of a nuclear weapon doesn't justify the death of millions of civilians. Oh, there would be all sorts of outcry in this case too, in the UN and on the media, but very likely the USA wouldn't fire at a city. Again, in the American mind, the use of nuclear weapons is an unthinkable event in war, so their use would be kept back as a last-ditch effort to protect the homeland. They might escalate. They might begin using smaller tactical weapons themselves in payback for what was done to them, but it is unlikely they would fire their arsenal of weapons. Russia may be using the Ukraine crisis, by the way, as a test of sorts. Is Russia testing NATO's resolve to defend its allies? They already know that they will not defend their non-NATO allies with troops. That's already been proven because they didn't defend Ukraine with troops. They even know that Western Europe won't cut off the supply of Russian oil to defend a non-NATO ally. What about if a limited tactical nuclear weapon is used? Is someone like Putin willing and capable of doing something like that? He has already fired a hypersonic missile as part of his conflict, a hypersonic missile with a traditional warhead, but he might, in fact, use a tactical weapon. It's possible that he will test NATO with a nuclear shot just to see what they're going to do. You know, a small tactical shot. Ukraine is the perfect place for a madman to act since it's not a NATO ally. Now, self-preservation is a key to Putin's actions in the Ukraine. We already have shown that. He is a member of the World Economic Forum. He knows their plans for a great reset for the world economy. He knows that likely means he is going to lose his power to them if he does nothing. So he invaded Ukraine in part in order to create a buffer between him and Europe. And if he wins, he has a new launching base that's closer to Europe for an eventual invasion of the European homeland to really put a stop to the Great Reset. As we can see, the use of nuclear weapons isn't an all-or-nothing thing, especially in the hands of a madman, and the Western powers' deterrence-only approach to their use might not be the only way that nuclear weapons can be used. Okay, let's up the ante. What about Western Europe? What if Russia invaded Poland, Germany, France in a blitzkrieg? Would the United States honor their NATO promise and defend Germany and France even with nuclear weapons? Would Europe defend themselves with nuclear weapons? What if they couldn't? Up to this point in the video, we've been discussing what a nuclear nation would or wouldn't do. What if Russia disarmed the capabilities of these nations to fire their weapons entirely? Russia has something known as a super EMP weapon. One of these warheads, exploded high above Brussels, miles above the earth, would fry the electrical grid and the electrical devices from Britain all the way to the eastern border of Ukraine, all of this according to General Fry. And it would paralyze all of Europe electronically. If Russia's intent was to invade Europe, this might be exactly what they would do first. They would essentially disarm them, or at least disarm them 90%. I don't think the EMPs would do all the damage and eliminate every electronic. Probably it would be about 90% damaged. Only then would the Russian tanks roll across the Danube River. With 90% of European weapons disabled, fighting back would be almost impossible. What would the USA do in that situation? Would they risk worldwide destruction to keep their promise to protect Europe? I don't know, but I sincerely doubt it. I think they would let Russia have Europe. And then, of course, maybe they would be unable to fire their own weapons. Maybe Russia and China would cooperate and use EMPs against the USA and disable them at the same time. Maybe they use North Korea and Iran as proxies to fire these EMPs so Russia and China aren't blamed in the attack. I mean, it's a complex situation. Very possible complex situation. But that is why we need to see what the Bible says, to place our thinking on firm footing. Only God sees what will happen, and He has chosen to give us some insight into it. If you read most commentators, they will tell you that the events on the day of the Lord sound like nuclear weapons. The sun, moon, and stars being hidden by thick clouds, the eyes of men melting in their sockets, truly horrid things. However, the day of the Lord is the wrath of God, not the wrath of men. It is God's judgment being poured out. So although these things sound like nuclear weapons, this channel doesn't think they are. Rather, the first place that we see the possible use of nuclear weapons is in the early parts of the 70th week of Daniel, during the 4 horsemen, long before the end. At the second seal of Revelation, we learn that peace is taken from the world. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. If the world is truly about to enter the 70th week of Daniel, then this seal will open, possibly in the near future. And 3 things happen when it does. The rider of his horse is given power to take peace from the earth. The rider of his horse causes people to kill each other, and to him is given a great sword. Let's look at each of these individually. Who gives him these things? Why, God. God gives the spirit of war and bloodshed the right to do these 3 things. The first is to take peace from the earth. Now, in the history of the world, it has never really been at peace. It's been estimated that only 268 scattered years in all of human history has there not been a war. So the taking of peace from the world isn't just the start of a new war. There has always been war. It's the taking of peace of mind from the inhabitants of the earth. This is what the Greek word peace means in this verse. Irene, meaning rest or peace of mind. What could remove peace of mind? Well, the beginning of the use of nuclear weapons is one thing. Although there is no peace of mind in Ukraine right now, most of the people of the world aren't tremendously anxious if nuclear weapons aren't being used. But if nuclear weapons and fallout start to spread around, people will become extremely anxious, even more than they are now. So this taking away of peace of mind could be a sign of the use of these weapons. It could be other things too, but it's possible a sign of nuclear weapons. The second thing the rider of a horse is given is the power to cause people to kill each other. The Greek word here is a lot stronger than the word meaning just to kill. It is svadzo, meaning to butcher or to slaughter each other, to kill violently. Again, could mean a lot of things, but nuclear weapons is one. And the third thing the writer is given is a great sword. He is given a weapon, a great weapon. Might this be a nuclear one? All of these things are possible. And all 3 things the red horse rider is given could imply nuclear weapons being used. Not necessarily, but possibly. In Matthew 24, verses 6 and 7, which parallels this passage exactly about the red horse. In other words, it's about the exact same events. We read, "You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for these things must take place. But that is not yet the end, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places." In this previous video and other videos, we explained that the term earthquake in the Greek seismos can mean something quite different than a traditional earthquake. It literally means great shaking and could be anything from a violent storm to the shaking of a nuclear blast. So in the thinking of this channel, nuclear weapons are possible at this point early in the 70th week of Daniel. They could be the great shaking. In Daniel 8, we read about this later event in the 70th week, speaking of the Antichrist. Quote, "His power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people." Destroying to an extraordinary degree. Sure sounds like a nuclear weapon. And in Daniel 11, we read this further confirmation of possible nuclear activity by the Antichrist. "But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many." And an even greater confirmation of the use of nuclear weapons is found in the account of Mystery Babylon in Revelation chapter 17, verses 16 and 17. "And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the prostitute, and make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose." So, the 10 horns and the beast are going to eat the flesh of Mystery Babylon and burn her up with fire. If that doesn't sound like a nuclear weapon, I don't know what is. But when exactly is the time when nuclear weapons begin to be used? This is part 1 of a 2-part video on exactly this topic. When? When does it happen? So click right here to see our theory on when the Bible predicts that mankind is foolish enough to launch nuclear weapons at each other. If the link hasn't appeared yet, it will come out tomorrow, and I'll see you there.